Coming up. Reportage.
Yeah, let's get French about this.
Okay, reportage.
You know, you can buy cat fountains online.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Leslie.
cat
No.
fountains. Yeah, I'm thinking of getting one myself. If you went into the National Gallery in London, there's not a single painting by Lowry. Not a single painting.
I go to the National Gallery all the time. I've never seen one. But
not a single painting by Lowry.
Not even in the basement?
Nope, nothing.
Okay.
They don't have any.
Do they not want one?
Hello, my name is Leslie Primo, and I'm the author of The Foreign Invention of British Art.
Hello, my name is James Payne, and I'm the author of Great Art Explained.
And today we are going to talk about, I suppose, a contentious artist, really, Lawrence Stephen Lowry, also known as L.S. Lowry, beg your pardon.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Lowry, which is, and the reason we chose this one is because I know next to nothing about Lowry, and I'm not critical of Lowry, but it's not my cup of tea really. So I'm really interested in learning a bit more about him. So.
Yeah, let's talk about L.S. Lowry because he is a contentious artist, and I say contentious. Not that he wanted to be contentious, but he's contentious because lots of people think, well, he's not that great really, and he's very easy to not like, shall we say. So I thought, why not talk about somebody like that? You know, because clearly quite a lot of people do like Lowry. And, you know, I've got to say, I'm on the record now. I'm a bit of a convert, really. So
yeah, that's interesting. So I hope to be converted myself.
Yeah.
And so I know what his paintings look like because as a kid growing up in the UK, you see his paintings quite a lot.
Absolutely, yeah.
And with people in my family, they loved his work actually.
Yeah.
And but even in his lifetime, though, he struggled with criticism.
He absolutely struggled with criticism. And, you know, you pointed out your family like it. And, you know, so do, you know, people that I know, working class people really love his work. Yeah. And yet he did struggle with a lot of criticism. In fact, he was called by many of his critics a Sunday painter.
Oh,
That's kind of one of the worst criticisms you can get with a Sunday painter.
Which is suggesting that he's doing it as a hobby.
As a hobby.
Yeah, that's what that means.
Yes, that means that it's as a hobby and that, you couldn't earn a living from it because it's just not good enough, really.
And did he make a living?
He kind of made a living, but strange enough, he did answer that critic. He said that if I'm a Sunday painter, I'm a Sunday painter that paints every day of the week.
Oh, okay. I don't know if that's worthy of Oscar Wilde or any of those criticisms because I can barely understand what that means. Yeah, I do get it. Okay, so I know something else about Lowry.
Oh yes, what's that?
I know that was he a rent collector or something?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Didn't he have a full-time job as well as being a painter?
Absolutely. And you know what? That was only revealed when he died. In fact, he kept it a secret.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He kept it a secret that he had a full-time job.
He kept it a secret that he had a job?
Yeah, that he had a job.
Okay, so the critic was right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He kept it a secret.
Right.
And, you know, I can only imagine that the reason why he kept it a secret is that then if it turned out he had a full-time job, then it would mean that his work was unsuccessful because he wasn't able to earn a living from it. But, you know, as we all know in the art world, just because you can't earn a living from painting, doing what you love, your art, doesn't mean you're not a serious artist or you're not interested in art. Loads of artists I know don't earn a living from being artists, and they have other jobs because they can't sell their art. Doesn't mean their art's not very good. And Lowry was in the same position, effectively. So he's a rent collector.
Right.
But clearly his family knew about him being a rent collector, but they didn't like his art, by the way. His family thought his art was absolute rubbish.
So when is he operating?
Well, this is the thing. Lowry's born in 1887, which is extraordinary because he dies in 1976.
Oh my Lord! Wow. Okay, wow.
Yeah. So that's extraordinary.
So 89.
Yeah. Your maths is getting really good, actually, James. Yeah.
89. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, oh my gosh. So he had a very, very long life.
Yeah, a very long life, but also a life that saw 2 world wars.
Yeah, interesting.
As well.
Was he in the war?
No, he wasn't. No, but he worked. He worked at his father worked as an estate agent.
Right.
In fact, his father was Northern Irish. Actually, worked as an estate agent, and there was talk about him going to work in his father's job in the estate agents, but unfortunately, he was deemed to be absolutely useless.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it was the argument was that he was steered towards a career not a career, but steered towards art generally.
Yeah.
Because as he says in his own words, that his family thought he was good for nothing else.
So it's fair to say he didn't have the support of his family.
No, he did not have the support of his family. No.
So I mean, yeah, it's super interesting that you're, you know, are you an artist if you're you know, not successful? But the thing is that by the 1970s, he was well known. His work was being published. So he must have been famous in his lifetime.
He was famous in his lifetime. But the fact that he kept that full-time job throughout his life, right up to the day he died, suggests that although he was successful, he clearly wasn't being paid enough money for his art if he had to keep that full-time job on as a rent collector. So no, he's sort of successful, but not really.
And I think that still carries through today, right? That kind of attitude towards him. I read the other day that the highest price ever paid for his work at an auction was 7.8 million, which when I first read that, I thought, oh, that's quite a lot of money. But then if we compare him, because I believe you can compare him to David Hockney, David Hockney's work, which was Portrait of an Artist with a pool with two figures, that went for $90 million, you know, so it's a big, huge difference.
A huge jump. But
but it's still a good price, though.
But let's think about when that sold. It sold in 1953 for 7.8 million.
No, that was the work was 1953.
The work was.
It was bought quite a bit later.
Yeah,
but it was bought by the museum, by the Lowry Museum.
The Lowry Museum.
So they paid 7.8 million.
But Lowry didn't get any of that money.
No, he was dead.
Exactly.
So it was too late for him. Did he have children or anything?
No, he was. He was famously totally single, never found love.
Oh, ever?
No, absolutely not.
Oh, and his paintings are a little bit sad, right?
Yeah, well, in fact, he says in his own words, another great quote from Lowry, "You'll find no joy in my paintings."
So he's not exactly selling himself.
No, not really. No.
His parents think he's rubbish. He thinks he's really like.
Well, he doesn't think he's rubbish. He just
but he thinks he's like, you know, sad. And,
So. No, because like for me, what he does is that he paints. You know, he paints Manchester and the industrial north as it is, and it is we've seen the paintings. People coming home from the mill, people going to the factory, people coming home from school. Yeah, it's grim up north.
And I suppose if he's born in
1887,
so about 1920, so it's the second wave of the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly, yes,
history, and he's from Bradford, right?
Yeah, well, he's actually he grew up in a wealthy suburb. Of Manchester.
Oh, Manchester.
Yeah, Victoria Park. Wealthy suburb. Doing really well, the family. So sort of middle class, doing really well. And this is the irony, isn't it, really? Because, of course, he is now celebrated and championed as a working class artist. But, in fact, he's not himself from that background.
Right.
He grew up in Victoria Park. But, unfortunately, his father did not so well in his estate agent's business. Right, and they lost a lot of money and had to move. And that's when he moves to Pendlebury. Pendlebury is a staunchly working class area. Yeah. And Lowry says that every morning you'd see the mill workers going to the factory at 5 every morning. They'd go past his house at 5 every morning.
So he's another artist who's painting what he's seeing.
He's painting what he's seeing, He actually hated Pendlebury when he moved there.
Oh, okay.
He said, he couldn't stand it. All these working class people, mills.
And I wonder if... I wonder if the subject matter is why he didn't receive such great critical attention. I don't think so, but yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is the subject matter. Right. No one was interested. But in fact, again, Lowry himself said he actually did some assiduous research into this, he said, to see if anyone else was painting industrial scenes like this. And then when he realised that nobody else was, he said that he was going to put industrial scenes on the map.
Right,
that was his own words.
Well, many artists were painting industrial scenes.
They were. They were. And funny enough, one of the artists that
including the Impressionists.
The Impressionists, and you're right to mention that, because what Lowry had, people said about Lowry, he was naive, untrained, that he was a Sunday painter, but in fact, it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, he trained under a French Impressionist artist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a French Impressionist artist who lived in Manchester. Oh. Yeah, so... And the artist's name, of course, was actually Pierre Adolphe Valette.
Okay, not really a household name.
Not really a household
but
name.
Important.
But important. But but Valet's industrial scenes of Manchester are still in those galleries in Manchester. They're still in the Lowry Gallery as well in Salford. Okay. And they are extraordinary scenes. Yeah. But the difference is between those and Lowry scenes is that what Lowry does is he strips the romanticism out of Impressionism.
Well, I think he really strips it out.
Yeah, he really does.
So he really takes all of the joy out of it completely.
Well, as he says himself, you'll find no joy in my paintings.
Yeah, but even down to his colour palette, it's very limited.
It's a limited colour palette, but it's a colour palette that reflected England at that time.
Yeah, of course.
That's what England looks like.
Well, actually, if you've never been,
it's grey.
If you've never been to England, it's a very grey country.
It's grey,
but even Manchester gets sunshine.
Yeah, occasionally.
Yeah, he chose to paint it at its worst, really.
Well, well, that's what his mother said, actually. But no, I don't think he was painting at his worst. He was painting something. He saw something, and like Hockney said that as well about his hometown. Yeah. He said it's gritty and grey and but you could see something. There was something there that if you look closely enough. So in a way, there's a real affinity between Lowry and Hockney, that they looked in places that people didn't want to look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally think that the reason he isn't up there in the upper echelons of art history is because people are a little bit indifferent to him rather than there's not a real hatred of him. Yeah. There are many artists who some people hate and some people love. Yes, yeah. But me personally, I'm quite indifferent to his work. Yeah, it doesn't enter my head.
There's nothing more damning, James, than indifference.
Yes, yeah. I know. Exactly. Yeah.
Hate. At least you're actually expressing some emotion, but not even hating, but just being different. Exactly, that's even worse.
Well, until we decided to do this podcast, I can't think of the last time I thought about him. I've been to his museum. Yeah. I've been to his museum. And I must say, I thought the Imperial War Museum in Manchester was more interesting.
That's even worse than indifference, James.
Well, no, it's one of the greatest museums in the world. But So, but I did go, and I did kind of like it. I was just like, this is nice.
Yeah, the thing I like about Lowry is that Lowry tells it as it is. Yeah, and he in many ways he's almost like doing anthropology up north, where he's outside looking in at these scenes, and that's a really odd thing about it. He's part of this place. He's moved to Pendlebury, but at the same time he's not part of it. Right. He's like an outsider. And I like the idea that he's an outsider. It's not outsider art, but he's an outsider. He doesn't belong in that community. He's moved there from the posh place. In fact, Lowry went to a private school.
Okay, so does that mean, do you think that he's looking at those people with affection that he's painting, or disdain?
Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, he's looking at those people he's painting in completely an anthropological way.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's neither disdain or it's neither passion or love. He's just fascinated by.
In other words, indifferent.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I see what you're doing there, James. That's really good. Yeah.
So it's so where did he come from? So what's his education process, and how did he get from being born in this period of history to doing these very, very naive paintings? Because I don't think of, when I look at his work, it doesn't remind me of what I think about the Industrial Revolution. No. When I think about the Industrial Revolution, I think of paintings like The Scream by Edvard Munch.
I don't think of that when I think of Industrial Revolution.
Okay, well, that's very much about the Industrial
Revolution.
There's
no factories in The Scream.
No, but it's about what effect it was having on people. Whereas I think, But
if you're going to talk about the effect the Industrial Revolution has on people, why not put some factories in it and some people in it coming from a factory?
Yeah, okay, so it's documentary then.
Yeah, there's an element of reportage about it.
Oh, okay. Reportage.
Yeah, let's get French about this.
Okay, reportage. Okay. Let's talk about class in this particular aspect. It's very interesting. Yeah. So he is someone who's displaced from his class in a way.
He is. Yeah, he's displaced. Yeah.
And so it doesn't sound like he had a very happy life at all, really.
Well, it must be said, in fact. What they found some recordings. A student had recorded him back in the early 19th, early 20th century, and these recordings are extraordinary. And yet he doesn't sound as though he's very happy. He wasn't very happy. The only time he was happy is that he received a letter from London praising his work. And he carried that letter around with him for absolutely ages.
Oh, no, I'm starting to like him
Yeah,
now.
yeah, he carried that letter because one person in London who owned a gallery actually praised his work.
Wow.
And this is what kept him going.
Yeah.
But other than that, he was rather sad because he didn't really have a place in life. He was an outsider. He didn't belong anywhere. His parents didn't like what he was doing. Being a rent collector also made him an outsider.
He was hated, probably.
Well, yeah, he's going around to people's houses, getting rent. So he never fitted into the community because you can't be one of the community if you're collecting rent from them, can you? Really? Yeah.
No, but
yeah.
I think if we're talking about that kind of lonely life, kind of displaced life, the first person that comes to my mind is someone like Edward Hopper, who had a very miserable life, and he's going to paint nighthawks, and I think Edward Hopper took his anger and his pain out on his paintings, and that's what makes him so interesting.
Yeah, but Edward Hopper's American.
No, I know he is.
Yeah. That's
but he's using his anger and his hatred and his sadness to make these really vibrant, powerful paintings.
Yes.
Whereas I feel with Lowry sometimes that there isn't emotion in his painting.
Yeah, that's because he's English. You see, that's why I said he's American. So.
Ah, okay, all right. So, well, you're quite emotional.
Well, yes, I'm a different sort of English person. It must be said. I'm not your average English person.
Yeah, I'm very emotional.
Yeah, exactly. You're not the average English person either. But Lowry was very English about these things.
Okay.
He is taking out all those things are being expressed in his painting, but in a very English way.
And what did he look like? Did he wear a suit and tie?
He did.
Oh, okay, like that period.
Yeah, he wore suit and tie every day and a hat. And again, that's really working class, strangely enough.
Yeah.
A suit and tie and a hat every day.
Yeah, for younger people who are watching this podcast, they might not know. Like my uncles and my granddad always wore a suit and tie, every day.
Yeah.
And my granddad was a bus driver.
Yeah, but suit and tie.
But even in the evenings, he'd wear a tie. My nan dressed up and stuff.
Yeah.
So
my father-in-law was a lorry driver, and he wore a suit and tie every day. Even 30 years after he'd retired, you'd go round to his house in Cork in Ireland, and there he would be wearing a suit and tie. Yeah, exactly. So it's a very working class thing. So he's a strange anomaly. So look, Lowry was born in 1887 in the market town of Stretford, Trafford, now part of Greater Manchester. And it seems as though he did actually used to sketch as a young boy.
Okay.
And unfortunately, as I say, his family didn't have much thought about his art. Lowry said that they suggested he take up art because he wasn't fit for anything else, as I mentioned before. But he did actually start enrolling in evening classes in 1905.
Right,
so look, he was born in 1887. 1905, he's enrolled in evening classes. So he's still sort of teenager. So clearly, he's already started from quite young.
And what's his early work like?
That's the thing, James.
Okay.
His early work is absolutely academic.
Okay.
He does figure studies, he does pen and ink drawing, he does black chalk drawing, and they are anatomically correct, and they are absolutely well finished works. You wouldn't know that this was Lowry. They're completely different from what he then ends up painting. And then Lowry then goes on to say that he hates Impressionism.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he has no emotion.
He didn't like Impressionism at all. But even though he was taught by an Impressionist tutor, of course, Valette. And Valette went on to say that he didn't really like Lowry's work.
But I think you correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know enough about Lowry at all. But when I think of Lowry's work, I think of big spaces. I think of there's a famous one of people going to a football match, for example.
Yes.
I think of crowds.
Crowds, yep.
And I think of conformity. And now I'm learning through you about his life. It sounds to me like he was very much a conformist, plus he was hiding as well.
He was hiding as
hiding his job.
Yeah, hiding his job.
Hiding, his profession from his parents. And so it's like maybe his work is about conformity and the British conformity,
Well, in a way, what Lowry's work is about is Lowry is struggling against conformity, but he's trapped within this constraints of conformity. His mother is very middle class, upper middle class, and is aspiring to be more than that. And Lowry is part of that. So in a way, he's struggling against conformity.
One thing I read about him was that he was very close to his mother. They had a very close and strange relationship.
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
And that
yeah.
when she died, after she died, his paintings changed a little bit in the fact that there became less figures, it became more sparse and
They did, yes, yeah.
more spread out. That's one thing I read about him.
Yeah, that it affected him deeply, that the passing of his mother, and in fact that happened only just a few months after he got his first show in London.
Okay.
Yeah, so it sort of took the sting out of that. So, at last he'd been recognised. He got a show, and then his mother dies just a few months later.
Wow.
And then towards the end of Lowry's life, what he starts to produce are the people disappear.
Oh, okay.
They start to disappear, and it starts to be just these desolate images of the beach, of the sea.
Wow.
And then he becomes obsessed with water. He paints water over and over again, or seascapes over and over again.
And who else does that? Who else paints water again and again? Is David Hockney, of course.
Well, you know what? The other person that paints water at the end of his life over and over again is Leonardo da Vinci.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Leonardo da Vinci produces hundreds of drawings of just water. Towards the end of his life, that's all he does. He becomes obsessed with water, the properties of
I
water.
wonder what that means.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, have you ever seen cats when they look at when running water? Cats are fascinated by water. They start doing things like that, and they don't know what it is, and they're just absolutely fascinated. You can buy cat fountains online.
I didn't know that.
Cat fountains. Yeah, I'm thinking of getting one myself.
Okay, I'm not a cat person really at all. Yeah.
I've got a cat, but my partner says no, you're not getting a cat fountain.
That's a really good idea. I like it more and more every day. So
there's a fascination, a sort of a childish fascination with water. But that childish fascination with water is also the sort of fascination that we lose as we get older.
Ah, okay, interesting.
As we get older. And in many ways, lots of painters are trying to recapture that childhood fascination or with something. And Picasso tried to do that, didn't he?
Yeah, of course.
So I think that's what Lowry's doing at the end of his life, in the same way that Leonardo da Vinci's doing that as well, this interest in water.
Okay.
So that's what he does towards the end of his life. So it's a fascinating life, really. Of course, he trains under this French Impressionist painter from about 1915 to 1925, actually, and produced some extraordinary works that were absolutely amazing, but then completely abandons it and goes completely the opposite to French Impressionism.
Overnight or slowly?
Kind of overnight, really.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So can we go back to the gallery show that you mentioned?
Yes, yeah.
So the gallery show was in London. That was his first gallery show?
His first gallery show, it was Lefebvre Gallery.
Oh, Lefebvre Gallery. Okay, that's a very important gallery.
Exactly,
as well.
yes,
okay.
yeah.
And how old was he at this point?
Well, at this point, he's now he's about 50.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he's getting on a bit.
He's getting on a bit, yeah. It's taken him quite a while to actually get to that point. And also at that point, suddenly he starts to pop up in short films.
Oh,
what do you
mean?
Yeah, actually online, if you go online to YouTube, there are actually short films of Lowry walking around in his native Manchester, etc.
Oh, wow.
And talking to camera.
Talking to camera?
Yeah, talking to camera.
I need to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? For somebody who was born in 1887, suddenly the photography's around and moving pictures are around.
Yeah.
And he's in them.
Yeah.
So it's quite an extraordinary childhood. He also had a collection of pre-Raphaelite paintings.
Oh.
Yeah, he was a great fan of the pre-Raphaelites.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I'm lost.
I know.
I'm a bit lost. It's like when we first talked about doing this podcast, and I thought by this point I'd really like him. But I still don't think I'm there yet.
And you're not there yet. No,
especially
is it the pre-Raphaelites that
that's
put you
really
off, James?
that put me off. Yeah, that's like the final nail in the coffin. Really. Oh, sorry about that. If you like pre-Raphaelites, I'm just not a big fan.
Yeah.
So
is that like me saying I like Jack Vetriano? Is that
I'm afraid we're kind of heading in the same territory. Yeah. So, but it's but I honestly still feel like I don't know him very well.
You know, he had 17 works by Dante Gabriel Rossetti.
17?
17.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. 17 works by him. Yeah,
well, he bought them from secondary sources.
He bought them, and he had a drawing by Ford Madox Brown as well.
Whoa.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And these are all on his wall when he died in his house.
And if you don't know these people, they're very big artists nowadays. So mind you, by the time he was collecting them, they weren't very well known. They were dismissed until the 1970s, really. So
So by 1928, he actually, at the age of 41, his first work was purchased by a public institution.
Oh. What year?
1928.
Okay.
That's he's 41, and that's when his first work is published by Salford Museum and Art Gallery.
Salford Museum
and Art Gallery, and it acquired a street scene, a painting called a street scene, or St Simon's Church. Yeah, so so he's 41 but he's 52 by the time he gets his exhibition at Lowry Gallery.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a timeline, as it were.
Yeah.
He kind of sort of finally actually makes it, as it were, with this exhibition at Lowry Gallery in when he's 52 by that time. So that's when he finally makes it. So it's quite a long road, as it were, shall we say. Yeah, 1939, of course, first solo exhibition to the Lowry Gallery.
This is a period in time when artists, even if they're selling the work, are not selling them for tens of thousands. They're selling them because it suggests that he never really achieved high status in the art world, because otherwise why did he work his whole life?
Exactly. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anything. You can be a jobbing artist.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, he also says, I painted portraits that nobody wanted, landscapes that nobody wanted, sea pieces that nobody wanted, and then I painted an industrial scene and people laughed at that.
Right.
These are his own words. So it shows you that he is kind of not very happy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, he is a bit bitter about the reception he got.
And are there any artists that you know of that use him as a source and would say they were inspired by him? Or
that's a good point, actually. Yeah.
I mean, most artists have followers. Or
the thing about Lowry is that he doesn't have any of that. And the reason why he doesn't have any of that is that there's a prejudice towards him.
Okay.
And no one wants to admit that they like him in terms of actual art professionals like myself. And therefore, artists then feel as though if they are inspired by him and quote him, that they're never going to be successul because that people won't take them seriously. Yeah. So there's this prejudice towards him, and that prevents people from admitting that they like him.
I mean, I would say... after this podcast, I'm going to go back and look at him and kind of study him a little more. I would say that if you're watching this on YouTube, for example, it would be great for us if you went and you Googled his name and you looked at his work and let us know what you think. What do you think? Because he is an artist that is reviled a little bit, but also loved in a big way.
He's loved equally in a big way.
There are other artists that we can think about when we're thinking about this kind of thing. And I would say a great artist to think about is Gainsborough or Constable, or one of the most famous paintings, for those of you who don't know, is the Haywain.
Haywain's great painting.
And it's a great painting, and it's a very critically loved painting. But when I was a kid, that painting was on chocolate boxes, and it was on
tea trays.
It was tea trays.
I've got a 1,000-piece puzzle.
Yeah. So my point I'm trying to make here is the difference is that L.S. Lowry was also on tea trays. He was also.
He was, yes.
It was also a very accepted figure by the working classes, by the public.
Yes.
But
the difference,
one was criticised.
Yeah.
One was totally accepted in the art world.
Yes.
And is that because of their background, and is it because of their education process?
It's the education, it's the background. You're absolutely right, James. Both of those things, actually, because in fact, if you go into the National Gallery in London, those of you, of course, who are abroad, or into any major institution, you will find a Constable, you will find a Gainsborough. But frankly, if you went into the National Gallery in London, there's not a single painting by Lowry.
Oh, is there not?
No.
I didn't know.
Not a single painting.
I go to the National Gallery all the time and never seen one. But
not a single painting by Lowry.
Not even in the basement?
Nope, nothing.
Okay.
They don't have any.
Do they not want one?
Well...
I just wondered whether it's a little bit like Jean-Michel Basquiat, where museums ignored him completely when he was alive, but when he was dead, now they can't afford him. So
Well, they ignored him when he was at museums when he was alive, and now that he's dead, they've still ignored him. But there is a caveat to that, of course.
Okay.
The caveat is that Tate Britain does have one of his works.
One.
Tate Britain has one of his works called, is the one about children going to school or leaving school, end of school day, children are leaving the school.
This is not selling it for me at all.
It's a great painting.
I mean, the thing is, you can make a great painting. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, another question for you.
Yeah.
Was he prolific?
Yes, he was. Yeah,
Okay.
he was prolific. But the odd thing about that prolific work is that clearly he was a full-time rent collector during the day.
Yeah.
So in fact, he paints his images at night in his loft.
Okay. And how many a day? Or
he's painting at least 4 or 5 a day.
Oh,
yeah,
wow. Okay.
Yeah, in this loft, just
4 or 5 a day.
Yeah, just churning them out really, and they're not really going anywhere.
Yeah, who's he churning them out for?
They're not exactly. They're just piling up.
So he's a little bit like Van Gogh. He had to get it out there.
Yeah, he had to get it out there. Yeah. He felt compelled to make them,
right?
And he does actually say that as well. You know, that he felt compelled to make them. But the full-time employment, by the way, was from 1910 onwards with the Pall Mall Property Company as a rent collector and clerk. And this was, of course, only known to his friends, as it were. So, yeah.
I mean, for me, what I'm getting out of this is that I can be a bit of a snob when it comes to art. You know, I think I can be.
No, me too, James.
Yeah,
me too, James.
And maybe I need to look a little bit further than that, because it is an artist who is so familiar. But even I don't know. It's like the Haywain is a painting we, growing up in the UK, know very well. It's an incredibly well-known household name painting.
But he's utterly establishment now, isn't he? Constable.
He's establishment, but also that painting was revolutionary.
Yes.
That painting was a change.
Yeah.
That painting inspired the Impressionists.
Yeah.
That painting inspired all these other people to go on to do other work. And it's a painting we look at, very traditional subject matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we look at Lowry,
Yeah.
it's a very traditional subject matter.
It is, yeah.
What school would you put him in, for example?
Well, that's the thing, and I'm glad you've said that. Actually, I'm glad you've said that, because when I think about great British art, I think about great creativity and originality.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's no one more original than Lowry.
Right.
Who else paints like Lowry? Nobody. You know a Lowry as soon as you see one. He's completely original. I mean,
it's definitely original.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, you say that with a wry smile, James.
Well, I know. I shouldn't say that with a wry smile, but I think because the problem is that we do dismiss folk artists. I think he's a folk artist.
Well,
sorry.
he would absolutely refute that.
I know, but I think he is.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. He says.
I think Maud Adams in Canada, for example, she's a folk artist. She has an equal reputation.
But as you well know, James, when you're labelled a folk artist, it's not in a positive way. It's usually pejorative.
That's changing. That's changing, I think. Yeah. I mean, there are great museums. I think outsider art is definitely being more accepted.
Yeah, that's another pejorative term, by the way.
I know.
Outsider art.
I think it was a pejorative term, but not so much now.
Yeah.
However, the establishment, that they have an issue with people like Lowry who are considered folk artists, and maybe that's why we should look at him. Maybe that's why I should reconsider whether how I feel about him.
Yeah, I mean, on the subject of why he kept on painting, this is these tapes that were released are fascinating in terms of an insight into why he does his work. And he says, I don't know what kept me on painting. That's how he's
right.
Yeah, kept me on painting. Something did. Something kept me on. That was it. And we was asked the question, why are you doing all of this? Right. And that was his answer. In other words, it seems as though as you intimated earlier, James, that he seems to have just wanted to get it out. Yeah. And he didn't. He himself doesn't know why.
His peak is the 1930s and 40s.
Well, his peak is the when he gets that first painting sold in 1928, and then he peaks when he gets the show, of course, in the show when he's 52 years old by then, the show in London, of course, and that's a big peak for him. So then he starts to emerge as an actual personality, and that's when he starts seeing him on film for the first time, talking as well. So
they? I think so. He lived till the 70s, right?
Yes, 1976 actually.
So so in the 1960s on BBC television like that, you've got those great programs being made about art, being made by Ken Russell and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember seeing ones about Lowry. Were they on there, like Omnibus at the time?
Yes, there was. Yeah, he does appear on those programs.
He
does appear. Yeah. Although it must be said, they're not exactly encouraging in their attitude towards him.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
It's all a bit sort of standoffish, a bit snooty, as it were. Okay. Yeah, a bit like you, James. Really.
A bit like me. Yeah. A bit standoffish and sweet. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, but you're right. You're right. It is my kind of attitude, and I need to maybe readjust my attitude because I'm now interested in him. For me, with what I've done for the last few years, anyway, about the whole concept of democratizing art and making art more accessible to people, is when I'm looking at art and so-called explaining art, which I'm not really. With Lowry, I find there's not much to explain. It's pretty clear what he's painting and what he's doing. There's no kind of hidden messages or anything.
No, there's no hidden messages. No.
Yeah,
no.
I mean, and it's like
But there is a lot to explain.
Yeah, there's a lot to explain, as we found.
Yeah,
we talk about it for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that he is painting a very strange time in the world.
He is,
including the Second World War. I guess he's painting by that period.
Yes, he's still painting. Yeah.
And yet his work doesn't reflect that. Maybe I don't know. Does like his work is okay? How I think of his work is industrial Britain. Okay, that's how I think of his work.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
But industrial Britain wasn't a great place,
No.
for a lot of people who were working there.
No, it was not. No.
A lot of people being brought from other countries, for example, to work, and it wasn't a great place.
No.
And with his, I can hear the factory bells going. I can hear Gracie Field singing in the distance.
Yeah.
I can hear them like, "Oh, come on, let's go to work," and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether they reflect the reality of those times.
Well,
Maybe that's the point.
Well, in a way, Lowry lives in a somewhat hermetically sealed world. Really, it's not a world where we see the war. Although, if you look closely at some of his paintings, what you'll see in the background is barrage balloons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Amongst the factory chimneys are barrage balloons.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not as though he's not saying it's not there.
Yeah.
It's just not what he's concentrating on.
Yeah.
In the end, I think for him, it was about the people, about the place itself, Pendlebury, about Greater Salford, Manchester, and the lives of those people. And that, for him, was his world.
Yeah. I think all the things that I've been saying, which can come across as negative, is quite often a negative thing in itself. That we can't have art for art's sake. We can't have art that just shows what it is.
Yes.
So there has to be some kind of message. There has to be some kind of hidden meaning.
Yeah. But what about that? Yeah, what about that? And as I said, at the beginning, what for me Lowry does is that he strips out the romanticism from Impressionism. Impressionism, absolutely wonderful, industrial scenes. In fact, Valette, his tutor, paints some extraordinary industrial scenes in Manchester. They look wonderful. They're very romantic, but they romanticize it really.
Of course, yeah.
And for the people that live there, that wasn't a reality to them, looking at a Valette painting.
Yeah.
But looking at a Lowry painting, that is a reality for them. So, I think how they feel is valid about how they live. Yeah. And Lowry paints them how they are.
I suppose so. I think, I think it's how you can view things on so many different levels. I think like Seurat's painting, in National Gallery's famous painting, painting in the Industrial Revolution, but you're right, sometimes it's romanticized, sometimes it's a little bit in the distance, and they're using these beautiful colors and stuff. And I guess the reality of the UK at the time was grey.
We're not France.
Yeah, it was grey. It was like grey and miserable.
We're England. We're not France.
Yeah, but do we want grey and miserable pictures on our walls?
Well, exactly. People didn't want them, and as he says himself, people didn't want them.
I really kind of like him now.
Yeah.
I kind of like him, but the problem is there's a bit of pity involved in that liking, which is kind of, I feel a little bit sorry for him.
Yeah, that's a backhanded compliment. Is
that
how you're going to end it?
No, Leslie. Leslie, I think that you have made me more interested in him, and I want to learn more about him. And
I'm pleased, James.
That is the point of doing these things.
Yeah, it is absolutely.
And it's why we chose someone who I have no clue about. And now I do.
Yeah. I just want to leave you with this quote there from the man himself, where he says, "I owe everything to life drawing, in my opinion. I'm tired of people saying I see you're self-taught. I'm sick of it."
Oh. Anyway, on a brighter note, check in for our next podcast. And engagement is really important in these podcasts if we want to make more of them, really.
Yeah. So don't forget, like and subscribe.
Yeah, it really helps you to leave comments, all those kind of things, and we read them, don't we?
We do indeed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and we're enjoying them. We're enjoying your feedback.
Yeah.
So go and look at Ellis Lowry, and let us know what you think.
Yeah.